it sounds like the Yukon government is starting to make moves here. Happily. Hello and welcome to the Northern Miner Podcast. My name's Adrian Pocobelli. They are calling it an emergency. They have had a leadership change at EMR, Energy Mines and Resources. Surely this is a good sign more than a month after the contamination began. It is ongoing. But at least there seems to be a sense of urgency with the Yukon government. So this is good news. Now, this was announced on July 26th that there's a leadership change, and there is also going to be contractors that are going to be brought in. There is, unfortunately, a forest fire stopping contractors from basically helping facilitate the situation. Again, the government really going out of its way to not take full responsibility of this mine, and maybe that's wise. It seems to me their main focus right now is stemming the environmental issue. And of course, that has been the issue for over a month. And unfortunately, it sounds like there's increasing contamination of the water. As Chief Hope points out, this isn't just about cyanide. This is about heavy metals entering the groundwater. And unfortunately, as we were being told very early in this process, it takes time for this contaminated water to hit the groundwater. And unfortunately, what we're starting to see with the testing is actually the groundwater is getting more contaminated. This isn't just about cyanide, which has been the focus of all the reporting and all the concern, as Chief Hope points out in my extended feature interview with her this episode. So a big show here from Na-Cho, Nyäk First Nations Chief Dawna Hope on this week's episode. Now, the interview took place on July 24th, and we did have a press conference on July 26th, as the Deputy Minister Lauren Haney emphasized at the end of her opening remarks of this press conference. She basically said, finally, we understand the urgency of the situation and the concerns of the First Nation of Na-Cho, Nyäk. It seems like, at least here, we have recognition, like real recognition, that this is, as they call it, this is an emergency. So there seems to be a change. Grounds for hope, I would argue, grounds for redemption. Let's see what happens. It is a first step. So let's look at what the government of Yukon said in their July 26th press release. Again, 2 days after the interview I did with Chief Dawna Hope on this week's episode. So keep that in mind for the full picture of events. So here it is. Yukon.ca. Government of Yukon provides updates on Victoria Gold Eagle Gold Mine heap leach failure. So here are the announcements. Enhanced Yukon government leadership. Deputy Minister Lauren Haney will now focus on the Eagle Mine emergency response. Again, that word, emergency. And secondly, effective immediately for a period of 6 months, Dennis Berry, president of Yukon Liquor Corporation, will serve as an interim deputy minister of Energy, Mines, and Resources. So it sounds like, again, the government is responding more than a month later, but at least there is a response. Now, they also have a heading here, Yukon government action in response to company's failure to follow inspector directions. And then they list what actions are going to be taken. Due to the company's failure to construct a safety berm, the government of Yukon has engaged contractors to design and build this berm. The berm is critical to ensure the groundwater monitoring and interception wells can be installed safely. The groundwater wells are required to monitor groundwater for potential contamination and to pump potentially contaminated groundwater to surface for treatment and safe discharge. The work is expected to take around 2 weeks to complete, and groundwater wells can be installed in certain locations as construction progresses, once it is safe to do so. However, there is a forest fire burning along the access road, which may impede the Yukon government's contractors' access to the site. On water management, on July 20th, additional directions were given to the company not to discharge any water to an unlined storage facility and to procure or construct more water storage facilities. The government of Yukon has directed the company to provide evidence of procurement or construction and are in regular contact with company officials about their responses on site. So, again, it sounds like the Yukon government seems to have woken up from what seemed like a very very slow response. They seem to be trying to make up for lost time, it seems. As far as the monitoring is concerned, daily water sampling is underway and samples are being collected at 8 surface water sites downstream of the mine and 3 groundwater sites. Just imagine if this had happened 2 days later, on June 26 rather than July 26. I think we could have even been proud. Nobody expects this kind of thing to happen. Nobody wants it to happen, especially in the middle of the summer. People are on holidays. But at least, once it does happen, you got to go into action, at least do something. Because again, there's ongoing contamination here. I mean, as I was saying a week into this, it seems like the government's strategy was to do a bunch of testing, wait for the testing to show something negative to jump into action. Well, it's starting to show something negative. So thankfully, something is happening here. So let's continue here. There's also a joint water quality monitoring plan for on-site and downstream of the mine site. They're being screened for various forms of cyanide, heavy metals, and other contaminants, and are being compared to federal aquatic life water quality guidelines and to the water quality objective as part of the mine's licenses. So this is all good news. On July 20th, Corgeo, a Yukon-based company, is leading on-site water sample collection efforts and execute the water monitoring plan that Yukon government has put in place. And also, a cyanide field kit is also being used on-site, and the result from the kit will provide a rough indication of the presence of cyanide, and the test takes only 40 minutes to return results. Kit results are not as accurate as lab results. But this is, I think, what Chief Hope was looking for. And listen to this. Over the past week, between the results coming back from laboratory testing and the Yukon government's field kit tests, they are observing an increase of contaminants in the water. So it's too long to go through the whole thing, but I take that as a good sign. It tells me that this is more than let's have a meeting about the mine disaster and maybe we can make another meeting so that we can plan another meeting and discuss it some more. It seems to me like action is being taken here. Let's hope. I mean, we're going to continue to watch this, but grounds for hope. And now turning to the Northern Miner, we have another update from Blair McBride, who has been covering this story brilliantly. Yukon hires contractors to aid Eagle cleanup. This is also dated July 26. The Yukon government is taking over more tasks in the cleanup effort at Victoria Gold's Eagle mine as the company has missed more conditions of the remediation plan. The government has hired contractors to build a protective berm under the unstable slope at Eagle to make a safe area to drill groundwater wells, Lauren Haney, Deputy Minister for Yukon's Department of Energy, Mines and Resources, or EMR, said in a news briefing on Friday. Quote, "I wouldn't frame this as a repercussion, but it is a result of the company not complying with those directions that we are stepping in to undertake construction of the berm ourselves," end quote, Haney said. The move comes just over 1 month after Victoria halted operations at Eagle after a failure of its heap leach pad caused a landslide that unleashed 4 million tons of material, with half leaving the pad's containment. Between 280,000 and 300,000 cubic meters of cyanide-containing solution left the containment, according to government estimates. So we're talking about 300,000 cubic meters of cyanide-containing solution and whatever else is in that solution. The company has issued 3 news releases since the accident. It has not responded to multiple requests for comment from the Northern Miner, so that continues. Yukon Premier Ranj Pillai on Friday appointed Dennis Berry, president of the Yukon Liquor Corporation, as interim deputy minister of EMR to assist Haney in her role to focus solely on the response to the Eagle accident. So again, the government late, but is kicking into action here, it seems. Blair continues, another purpose of the berm build is to take action while the status of the slope is being investigated. So we're hearing all the right things right now, aren't we? Action. The Yukon government earlier said the slope isn't stable enough for heavy machinery. Pelly Construction and Hecla Mining have been contracted to build the berm. Hecla operates the Keno Hill silver mine about 35 kilometers east of Eagle. Victoria is currently irrigating stored water through the heap leach to open up more storage capacity, which it calls a temporary 10 to 15 day measure the government confirmed in an email to the northern miner. It's also building additional storage capacity on site. Other ongoing actions include bringing the mine water treatment facility online according to an updated water treatment plan so it can discharge treated water as soon as possible. Although contaminated water is being treated on site, the treated water doesn't meet the mine water's license requirements to be released to the environment. Victoria has hired Lincoln Engineering to help with water treatment on site and with those upgrades. In an inspector's direction letter issued last Saturday and posted on the Yukon Water Board's website, Seven Bonet, a natural resource officer in the EMR department, outlined various directions Victoria Gold has failed to satisfy. Among them were that its water treatment plan provided in an unsigned memo on July 9th didn't sufficiently describe the ability to treat drain-down volumes from the heap leach facility or its ability to treat the quantity and quality of contaminated water stored in water storage ponds and within the heap. It also did not sufficiently outline how existing water treatment facilities could be modified to meet the anticipated daily treatment requirements of 15,000 to 20,000 cubic meters of water per day. Victoria was directed on July 10th to build a lined water storage facility to securely hold contaminated water, but as of July 17th it hadn't done so and had constructed unlined excavation pond. Bonnet set out several conditions Victoria was to meet by July 22nd. The miner was directed to increase capacity of water storage facilities by July 22nd, procure reagents necessary to treat contaminated water, and provide proof of a supply chain for the reagents and provide an update on reagent supplies. The company also had to start installing groundwater monitoring wells outside the slide impacted area by July 25th. Failure to follow the directions is an offense, and the company may have to pay any costs incurred in carrying out the directions, Bonet added. In a news release on Tuesday, EMR Minister John Stryker said the additional directions issued on Saturday were an example of the government's, quote, progressive enforcement's approach, end quote, to the Eagle cleanup response. And scrolling down a bit, asked how long Victoria can continue to fund the cleanup, Haney said she doesn't know, though said the government is aware of Victoria's low share price. Quote, it's not a positive outlook. For now, the company remains on site and is paying its contractors. We're pleased to see them doing that, end quote. Really, what would be the nice thing to happen here is if this thing actually got fixed and these people could go back to work and that this mining company actually doesn't go under. Wouldn't that be great? Also scrolling down, although groundwater monitoring near the site has revealed an increase in contaminants over the last week, the risk to aquatic life and drinking water is low, said Tyler Williams, a water resources scientist with Yukon Department of Environment. Quote, we're observing an increase of cyanide in the water. This is consistent with what we would expect to see for groundwater, which takes longer to seep into the environment and surface water, end quote. Yukon-based company Core Geoscience took over responsibility for testing water samples on July 20th. The territorial government is making progress towards an independent investigation of the accident in response to a call from the First Nation of Na-Cho Nyäk done in June. Terms of reference for an investigation have been shared with the First Nation of Na-Cho Nyäk done and are under review, and work on forming a panel is underway, said Kelly Constable, Director of Mineral Resources with the EMR department. So that is your latest on Victoria Gold, and our feature interview is extended and in-depth with Chief Dawna Hope of the Na-Cho Nyäk Dun First Nation, and she gives her experience in the first month of this ongoing, to quote her word, catastrophe. Now, zooming out, some big things happening in the metals markets. We continue to see them get really hit hard. Copper at $4.07 a pound. Amazingly, we have this headline just out of the Financial Times this morning, a few hours ago. BHP revives copper ambitions with $3 billion Filo deal. Joint takeover of Argentine assets with Canada's Lundin is the latest sign of consolidation in the mining sector. And so just a couple of paragraphs here. BHP, the world's biggest miner, and Canada's Lundin have agreed to acquire South American copper miner Filo in a $3 billion deal and the latest sign of consolidation in the global mining sector. BHP has been on the hunt for copper assets after it walked away from a £39 billion offer for Anglo American in May. The Filo deal means BHP and Lundin will take full control of the Filo del Sol prospect, which straddles the Argentine and Chilean border near the copper-rich Atacama Desert. BHP had an existing 5% stake in Filo, acquired in 2022, while Lundin had 32%. The two companies will form a 50-50 joint venture, into which Lundin will also incorporate its Jose Maria project located about 10 kilometers from Filo del Sol, opening up cost benefits for bringing the two prospects into one business. BHP will pay a larger share, $2.1 billion, as part of the Filo deal to reflect inclusion of the Jose Maria asset. Finally, Mike Henry, chief executive of BHP, said in a statement, quote, "This transaction aligns with BHP's strategy to acquire attractive early-stage copper projects and enter into strategic partnerships with parties where complementary skills and experience can deliver long-term economic and social value." End quote. So, pretty interesting. BHP not giving up. Maybe Mike Henry felt like he needed a win as well, and with copper risking falling below the $4 mark, maybe getting another opportunity here. Continuing on, just a couple of updates out of Africa. This is the Associated Press via voanews.com. Eastern Congo's gold-rich province bans mining activities to restore order. This was on July 19th, and quite an interesting development here. There is a lot of suspicion that part of the reason these areas are in conflict is because of the minerals. And here's the Associated Press. The governor of South Kivu province in eastern Congo on Friday ordered the suspension of all mining activities to, quote, restore order, end quote, in the mineral-rich region, which is plagued by violence from armed groups. Mining activities are suspended until further notice because of, quote, the disorder caused by mining operators, end quote, Governor Jean-Jacques Pursi Sadiki said in a statement without providing details. The statement said the aim of the decision was to, quote, restore order to mining throughout the province and to preserve not only human lives, but also the traceability of mineral production in these sites, end quote. The local authorities gave 72 hours to, quote, all mining companies, businesses, and cooperatives to leave the sites and places of exploitation, end quote, the statement added. So interesting strategy in an attempt to reduce the violence in eastern Congo, where there's so much of this coltan that is heavily used in the technology industry. And finally, Andrew Forrest has been making a few headlines here. Let me share them with you, and you can piece it all together. So first, the Vancouver Sun. On July 22nd, billionaire Australian developer putting BC hydrogen projects on hold. Of course, Andrew Forrest, we've been talking about here, at least since the start of the year, about really wanting a green nickel price. So now Andrew Forrest is putting BC hydrogen projects on hold. Then we have a story out of Reuters on July 24th, 2 days later, Fortescue to step up energy spending despite job cuts. This is Reuters via mining.com. Australia's Fortescue said on Thursday it will increase spending on its energy division to advance several new green hydrogen projects next year. And then scrolling down, its focus will initially be on 4 projects in Australia, the United States, Norway, and Brazil, with additional projects in Morocco, Oman, Egypt, and Jordan to follow. So Fortescue founder Andrew Forrest seeming to leave Canada out, interestingly. And then we got this headline on Electric, the electric vehicle website we love to follow here. Liebherr and Fortescue partner on world's first autonomous electric haul truck. And you see here a massive haul truck, kind of what might traditionally look like a Caterpillar vehicle, is something that Liebherr and Fortescue are jointly developing, what they're calling an autonomous haulage solution. So pretty interesting there. And final headline, Andrew Forrest, a busy individual. China's Costco shipping Fortescue to build green fuel supply chain. This is Reuters on July 29th via mining.com. China's Costco Shipping Corporation has signed a preliminary agreement with Australia's Fortescue to jointly build a green fuel supply chain to help reduce pollution from the shipping industry, the Chinese company said on Monday. So quite interesting. A lot of action going on at Andrew Forrest's Fortescue. So lots to look forward to this episode, including many more news stories, metal prices, and of course, our feature interview with Na-Cho Nyäk Dun First Nation Chief Dawna Hope in this week's feature content. If you want to find us online, you can find us at northernminer.com. You can find us on X at northernminer. and on Instagram at The Northern Miner, and on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, where we also host these podcasts, and wherever podcasts are available, including Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts. And with that, let's turn to the news. And turning to the website, Bloomberg News via mining.com, the future of deep-sea mining hinges on a contentious election. So, of course, deep-sea mining front and center, and we saw that wild story last week that was in BBC, among many other renowned publications, basically making the case for dark oxygen coming from these metallic nodules off the sea ocean rather than plankton. Kind of an interesting wrinkle in this whole debate. So apparently, this election is the most contentious ever held by the International Seabed Authority, which is based in Kingston, Jamaica. And it says here on one side is Michael Lodge, 64, who says one of his top priorities is finalizing mining regulations that would kickstart a potential multi-billion-dollar deep-sea metals industry. On the other side is Leticia Carvalho, a Brazilian ocean scientist who is 50 years old, who says finishing the regulations may take years more of negotiations to protect the deep sea from the most harmful effects of mining. The next leader of the UN-affiliated ISA will wield significant influence in determining whether companies can begin to exploit the world's largest known reserve of electric vehicle battery metals, and he or she will have the sole power to negotiate confidential contracts with mining companies. Quote, "This is a turning point," quote, says Andrew Thaler, a Maryland-based deep-sea scientist and consultant who closely follows the ISA. Quote, "Whoever is Secretary General during this moment will have an enormous role to play, as the only thing that's really holding up the commercialization of deep-sea mining is the finalization of mining regulations," end quote. Finally, the election takes place on August 2nd, so this is right around the corner. And final paragraph here, now, with just days before the August 2nd election, the ISA's dueling pro-mining and conservation-minded factions are ramping up pressure on the candidates. While 19 of the ISA's 168 member states have sponsored exploration licenses, another 27 have called for a moratorium or a pause on mining until its impacts on the deep sea are better understood. End quote. You can read the whole story. It is in depth by Todd Woody of Bloomberg News on mining.com. Continuing on, funds dump copper as rising stocks dampen bull spirits. This is Reuters via mining.com. Funds have slashed their long positions on the copper market as high and rising inventories cause a collective rethink of the market's short-term prospects. Investors rushed to buy copper during the second quarter, betting the metal would benefit from a turn in the economic cycle and a green energy demand booster. The bull narrative was spiced with concern that supply simply wouldn't keep up, creating yawning deficits and potentially explosive higher prices. The reality has turned out slightly different. China, still the engine room of global copper demand, shows no signs of escaping its property drag. Copper stocks in the country are unseasonally high. Worse, Chinese smelters have been exporting large volumes to London Metal Exchange warehouses. LME inventory last week touched a 3-year peak. The bull party is on hold. For now, at least, the consensus remains for higher prices later this year. And scrolling down to the end of the article, analysts aren't looking for much more downside, with a solid consensus that the bull rally will resume after the summertime blues, just as long as not too much more Chinese metal turns up in LME warehouses over the next couple of months. Continuing on, there could be a strike at BHP's Escondida mine. Union at BHP's Escondida mine urges rejection of contract offer, strike possible. This is Reuters via mining.com. The union at BHP's Escondida mine in Chile, the world's largest copper mine, has called on its nearly 2,400 members to reject a final contract offer from the company and prepare for a strike, the union president said. If workers reject the deal, a strike could start immediately. But Chilean legislation lets either party call for 5 days of government mediation, extendable by another 5 days if both parties agree. And union president Patricio Tapia said, quote, "We are much better prepared for a strike than before. We have a significant strike logistics fund 4 times larger than the one from 2017, end quote. He continues, quote, "And we also have credit agreements to meet the basic needs of workers and their families for a long time." So interesting development there. Another copper headline, this is Reuters via mining.com. Codelco says output falls 8% in first half of 2024. Chile's Codelco, the world's largest copper producer, on Friday posted a 8.4% drop in output for the first half of 2024, compared with the same period last year, to 580,000 metric tons, citing operational setbacks and difficult weather. And we have a quote from Chief Executive Ruben Alvarado, who said in a statement, quote, "We are working to ensure that, starting the second half of this year, production will begin its long-term growth rate," end quote. And just a headline here, Anglo American faces headwinds in keeping restructuring on track. Bloomberg News via mining.com. So after the BHP saga, Anglo American said they would restructure. Now they're facing some issues. And a couple of those headwinds, it says a fire and explosion at its flagship coal mine in Australia has complicated the De Beers sale, while the diamond market continues to languish, deterring potential buyers of the unit. Selling the coal business was seen internally and by investors as the most easily achievable part of the restructuring. Yet it was thrown into doubt with the incident at the Grosvenor mine in Australia at the end of last month. Despite that, Anglo's Wanblad said that it could still look to sell the entire coal business, including the impacted mine, and it would like to see a deal done by the end of the year. So, interesting fallout from one of the biggest mining stories of the year, BHP's attempted takeover of Anglo American. Another headline, Teck draws M&A attention from big miners in rush for copper. So more talk of the attractiveness of Teck as an M&A candidate. And it seems every week we're getting a story of the merits of Teck and how attractive it would be to BHP, Rio Tinto, Anglo American, Glencore, Freeport-McMoRan. So Teck getting more attention. And here's another interesting story we've been following, which is the Tianqi and the SQM Codelco lithium deal. Story, of course, they did what some are calling a soft nationalization of the lithium sector in Chile last year. And Tianqi keeps complaining. They have appealed now, as the headline here says, this is Reuters via mining.com, Tianqi appeals Chile ruling on SQM Codelco lithium deal. This is July 27th. So Tianqi has repeatedly called for the planned partnership between the state miner Codelco and SQM, the world's number 2 lithium producer, to be put to a shareholders' vote. Tianqi owns about a fifth of SQM. So it kind of looks like China is, at least Tianqi is flexing its muscle here. And here's a quote from Tianqi. Quote, "The CMF ruling we are appealing represents not just one particular case, but implies negative influences for future operations," Tianqi said, adding it would continue to take, quote, "all legal measures necessary," end quote, to defend its interests. And it continued, quote, "The events surrounding the Codelco SQM deal sets a major precedent of great gravity that has throughout the process exposed a lack of the most minimal transparency standards and respect for the rights of minority shareholders," end quote. So Tianqi, not happy at all with what's happening in Chile at the SQM Codelco lithium deal. Continuing on, Indonesia trying to cut China's stakes in new nickel projects. So this is Bloomberg News via mining.com, and of course we've been hearing, at least since the start of the year, of the huge investment that China has made in developing Indonesia's nickel production capacity. Now, Indonesia looks like they want to reduce that capacity. Here's a story. Indonesia's government is seeking to reduce Chinese participation in new nickel projects to help the industry qualify for U.S. government subsidies. The Financial Times reported, citing a person familiar with the matter. Government officials have been in discussion with investors to build new smelters in which Chinese companies have less than a 25% stake, the newspaper reported. Septian Hario Seto, Deputy Coordinating Minister for Investment and Mining, confirmed the country's efforts, according to the FT. In a response to written questions on Friday, Seto said the government would not intervene with a policy on Chinese shareholdings. Indonesia is the world's largest nickel producer, accounting for more than half of global supply. Currently, Chinese companies dominate local processing of the metal that's used in stainless steel and electric vehicle batteries. That could see much of Indonesia's production excluded from the U.S.'s Inflation Reduction Act, which gives generous subsidies to EVs provided their components aren't sourced from foreign entities of concern. That includes companies more than 25% owned by Chinese investors. To qualify for the subsidies, Indonesia would also need to sign a free trade agreement with the U.S. Talks between the two countries for a deal covering critical minerals have been ongoing for months, but have yet to produce an accord. So Indonesia really between two superpowers here. And just a few headlines. LME approves Saudi port as warehouse delivery point. That is Reuters via mining.com. The London Metal Exchange has approved Red Sea port city Jeddah in Saudi Arabia as a warehouse delivery point for copper and zinc, it said on Monday. Very interesting. Another headline, Toronto sees win in first new foreign miner listing since 2022. And this is Bloomberg News via mining.com, and it is Paladin Energy, who recently acquired fission uranium. And just a line here, Paladin Energy's arrival in Canada marks the first time since 2022 that a large foreign mining company will list its shares on the Toronto Stock Exchange, which has seen new corporate listings slow to a crawl. And the fission deal is expected to close in August. And Paladin's planned Toronto listing is part of an effort to secure approval for the transaction and also gain access to a larger shareholder base. Interesting. And final headline, uranium contract prices soar on uncertain supply and AI-led power demand. People talk about AI data centers being bullish for copper, also for uranium. And this is Reuters, and you can read the whole story on mining.com. Those are your news stories. Now, let's take a look at metal prices. And turning to metal prices, let's take a quick look at the bond market for context. The U.S. 10-year bond is yielding 4.18%. That is 0.05% lower than last week. The UK 10-year gilt is also lower at 4.07%. That is 0.08% lower than last week. And the Italy 10-year bond is yielding 3.71%. That is 0.05% lower than last week. So 10-year bond yields lower. Turning to precious metals, gold is trading at $2,388 even per ounce. That is $17 lower than last week, so back below $2,400. Silver is trading at $28.13 per ounce. That is $1.04 lower than last week. Platinum is trading at $951.90 per ounce. That is $4 higher than last week, and palladium is trading at $882.50 per ounce. That is 50 cents lower than last week. Turning to industrial metals, copper is trading at $4.06 per pound. That is 12 cents lower than last week. Iron ore is trading at $106.86 per metric ton. That is $2 lower than last week. Aluminum is trading at $1.02 per pound. That is 3 cents lower than last week. Lead is at 94 cents per pound. That is a penny lower than last week. And nickel also continues to fall at $7.23 per pound. That is 12 cents lower than last week. And tin also lower at $13.41 per pound. That is 67 cents lower than last week. Cobalt is unchanged at $12.08 per pound. Lithium edging slightly higher, but still below $12 at $11.78 per pound. That is 2 cents higher than last week. Uranium is trading at $82.45 per pound. That is $2 lower than last week. And zinc is also lower at $1.20 per pound. That is 4 cents lower than last week. So it appears the trend that was in place last week, where almost all metals fell in unison, seems to be in place this week, with the one exception being lithium, which is already very low, below $12. And those are your metal prices. Coming up, I'm very pleased to welcome to the show Chief Dawna Hope of the Na-Cho Nyäk First Nation, and we discuss in depth the first month of Chief Hope's experience in dealing with the heap leach pad failure at Victoria Gold's Eagle Mine in Yukon, and the response to it, and all of the concerns she's had, and her experience of the whole situation along the way. As a very important note for context, this interview took place on July 24th, 2 days before the press conference, where we started to see some action coming from the government. So those stories I mentioned at the beginning of the show happened after this interview. So that should be kept in mind. I hope you enjoy the interview, and I will see you on the other side. Joining us today, I'm very pleased to welcome for the first time to the Northern Miner podcast, Chief Dawna Hope of the Na-Cho Nyäk Dun First Nation. Chief Hope, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really thrilled that you're coming on the show. There's a lot of talk in the news of all these different points of view, but it's really great to just get it firsthand from people who sound like they're directly impacted or could be impacted by, say, this issue with Victoria Gold's Eagle Mine in Yukon. So what is your current sense of the situation? A lot of the listeners, of course, know the story up to this point. Like, where are we from your perspective in the day-to-day of this mine heap leach pad failure? Where are we in this right now?
Today is actually marks 1 month, exactly, June 24th to July 24th. And to be honest, I don't feel that there has been a lot of response on site.
So when you say there hasn't been a response, I guess let's go back in time then. As you say, it started on June 24th, this issue. And it's something I've observed as well. I mean, there hasn't been a huge amount of communication from the company. Last I checked yesterday, we had 3 press releases. I'm not sure if we've even heard from the premier yet. To be fair, there have been at least 2 press conferences and there has been some movement. But from your perspective, like, how did this story unfold for you?
Before being elected in April of 2023, I was actually very intimately involved in the project. I have worked for the First Nation of Na-Cho Nyäk Dun in a number of positions since 2007. And a lot of my work, I started as Fish and Wildlife Manager. I did environmental assessment following the ESSA process. I did that as a position for the First Nation. I came back. I was a liaison for the Alexco Mining Company. And I also was the lands manager and director of lands heritage and resources here before I was elected. So I've been very intimate in the project, I guess, since day one. I have worked alongside Bill Slater, one of our experts, for over 10 years on those projects. I'm very fearful. This is kind of exactly the things that we were worried about to happening.
So you have been directly involved in fostering this project along from the Na-Cho Nyäk Dun First Nation side of things. And ultimately, you are basically saying you foresaw somewhat the direction that things might head as things kind of culminated in the June 24th heap leach pad failure. Is that right?
Correct. It's just the history, I guess, behind a heap leach processes on its own. It's a very risky and highly impactful to environment when things go wrong.
I assume you brought this up, and I guess this was a concern of yours and maybe the team going in, and was that ultimately dismissed? Why then did this project go forward if this was a concern early on?
That is a good question, but I don't think that I can answer that. According to the current legislation that the Yukon is under, it's antiquated from the 1904. It just allows things to happen. A lot of our project assessments, 5 or 6 out of 30 recommendations get adopted by EMR.
Is that a government department?
Yes, it's a department in Yukon government, Energy, Mines and Resources.
Okay, excellent. So basically, to get the story right then, basically you were thinking, we don't love this idea of a heap leach pad because there are certain risks. However, we see that this is basically allowed. So what are we going to say to that? Like, is that basically the sense of how things went?
We do continue to submit our issues and concerns and hope that they're addressed. But like I mentioned, a lot of the times our project assessments, maybe 5 or 6 of 30 recommendations get adopted by Energy, Mines and Resources.
I see. So you might make up to 30 recommendations and you're saying only 5 or 6 are generally adopted.
Correct.
And then I assume when the other, say, 24 recommendations, when they're not adopted, do they give reasons?
Sometimes we get reasons. They're supposed to give reasons, but sometimes we do not get those reasons in the decision document.
Interesting. And so I guess, how do you feel about that?
It's concerning about the process and not addressing the partnership agreements that we had signed on and are legally binded by Canada in our final agreement.
Now, who is responsible then for answering these questions? I assume it's the government and not the company. Is that correct?
It is the government because the company is actually a proponent abiding by the government's regulations and legislation.
Right. Okay. So your deal ultimately is with the government, and it's the company's job to adhere to whatever the government says, basically.
Yes. However, we also have CBAs with the company, comprehensive benefit agreement, and that agreement spells out a relationship with the company that exists, that we are encouraging the company to follow the process within that as well.
Okay, excellent. Now, as far as your communication with the government, do you feel like you have good communication with the Yukon government?
No, I don't. I think that it is disconnected in ways. For example, just to deal with this catastrophic event, we've developed 3-tier teams to deal with it. I tried to come back and meet with those teams constantly so that we're all on the same page, because sometimes things don't get funneled up as quickly as possible when it should be in an emergency situation. We have actually asked right from the start that everybody be in the room when we meet so that there isn't this delay in corresponding responses and we get the quickest actions possible.
And of course, because time is of the essence here, right? I mean, if you have a potential contamination of the water supply, no matter how low or high the risk, whatever the case might be, you kind of want action on it if there is a risk. And it sounds like here there seems to be unambiguously a risk.
Yes, there is. We have been concerned about that from the start. The numbers just aren't adding up. The amount of solution that was coming out of the heap, the amount that they were trying to pump back and hold back. So we know that there was some that went to ground. It could be considerably a large amount that went to ground. And unfortunately, we received some information this morning that confirms that it is potentially almost meeting Haggard Creek in the groundwater through conductivity testing.
Okay, and what does that mean? It meets Haggard Creek. In other words, it is beyond a safe level. And I put the word safe in quotes because any level of cyanide, and I assume it's cyanide we're talking about, seems to me undesirable. But is Haggard Creek, it had elevated levels, and now what you're seeing in new testing is that you're seeing levels in the groundwater potentially, or in other areas that meet Haggard Creek's levels. Do I have that all right?
Yes, correct. That is correct. We just got word of it this morning, so I still have to confirm that. And I'd imagine our team is going to be working hard to pinpoint that and find out exactly how far it's spread. We've been asking for wells to be drilled since day 2. We've asked for a berm down lower in the valley to stop anything further from getting out and potentially stopping that groundwater. But we're running out of storage, and that's one of the biggest problems.
Very interesting. Of course, because they were trying to kind of move this water or deflect the water basically into, from what I understand, these kind of storage areas that were lined and then treat the water. That was the general strategy, right? And you're saying they're running out of storage from your understanding?
Correct. They did build a couple dams immediately. They were not lined though. The current ones that were on site were lined, and they were pumping them from the storage where they were collecting it into the events pond, which was lined. This past weekend, because the ponds are full, they started pumping the solution back up on the heap to use that as extra storage.
Interesting. So June 24th, like you were saying, this is a full month ago that this occurred. How long did it take you to be notified? It sounds like there wasn't a ton of information at the start. I mean, what was your experience of this unfolding failure, shall we call it? Do you feel like you were informed fast enough? Tell us about the response that you've gotten, the communications.
It was kind of shocking, the response, really. It was 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. I received a text from an outside source who had a friend that was working in the mine at the time. We also had another employee here that received information from inside and shared that with our executive director and myself. So we were aware of it. The executive director immediately called Mark Arento, who was stationed at Halfway Lakes. And that's how we kind of found out. We were never informed by the company. It was the executive director who had contacted Mark Arento, and Mark confirmed, yes, there was a slide, and he was actually on his way out the door to go assess it.
So in a sense, you found out through what we might call informal means of kind of knowing people in the area, but there was no sort of formal notification from the company. What about the government? They put out a press release, I believe, on the 26th. So 2 days later, did they ever have a formal notification to you? And when did they get involved with you?
So I'm just checking my phone, and I was contacted initially at 9 p.m. Monday, June 24th from the premier. I was not able to call him immediately because I just moved into a new location and I can't get cell service. So I contacted him the following morning when we had a talk then, and I haven't heard from him since.
Okay, I was just going to say, well, at least he got to you the same day for the premiere, but you haven't heard since. So in a sense, we might say, if we were to just assess the first day, we'd say, okay, company could have been more forthright and put out a formal communication to you. You found out informally, not ideal. Government at least reaches out within 24 hours, if not sooner, maybe 18, 17, 16 hours. You get the premiere messaging. Not a wonderful beginning, but we might say not a terrible beginning either. Was that your sense, or did you feel like there should have been, at that point, more urgency?
I feel that there should have been more urgency, considering the severity of the slide once we actually saw what was going on. We had people on site within 3 or 4 hours of receiving the messages. They were out on site by 10 or 11 o'clock that morning. And we had people on site every day since, except for a couple of days. They came back because unfortunately we had lost a young life and they came in for the funeral service.
Okay, sorry to hear that. So you're basically saying, as far as the response, like, hey, we were there in like 3 hours. We had people on site a few hours later. And all we got, in a sense, was it was the premiere in the text message, but basically all we got was a text message like 18 hours later.
Correct.
Now, how did things proceed from there? It sounds like it continued to be slow moving for the next week before you put out the press release on Facebook. How would you describe the next week in your experience?
The next week was a lot of pushing and trying to portray the severity of this emergency. And I feel that we still are somewhat still trying to do that.
Right. And to just be super clear with the audience here, the emergency itself, your concern is this contaminated water going into the groundwater and ultimately contaminating the water supply. Is that the front and center concern?
Yes, correct. Not just the water supply, but in the Yukon, we know very little about groundwater. We don't know where it comes up. We don't know how it moves. We don't know where it goes. We have a lot of springs that our citizens rely on the land for subsistence purposes. And now, especially considering you cannot see what the dangers are, we are fighting a war that's invisible now, and our people can't trust the land.
Exactly. There's too many unknowns ultimately here, right? I mean, you just don't know. And if you don't know if there's something wrong with the water, that causes a problem, obviously.
Yes, exactly. And we are only 90 kilometers by road away from the site. It's a lot closer by crow, of course.
Okay. Now, what would you like to see happen? Like, it seems to me, I guess my first response when I heard this story and interviewed Blair the following week, I thought, where is the sense of urgency of basically dealing with this disaster and basically trying to shore up the situation? And even if it's impossible, at least being very public about, look, we don't know what to do. We're calling experts all around the world to help kind of get something going. It sounds like, from my perspective, it didn't seem like there was a ton of urgency. And it sounds like you're kind of also saying that, but you tell me, like, do you get the sense that there is not enough urgency here?
Absolutely. And we have been actually saying that since the very beginning. Day one was a real shock for us, but day two, we have been asking for a berm down below. We've been asking for wells to be drilled so we can get an understanding of if and how far the spread has gone into the groundwater. Right from the start, they didn't believe that it was even in the groundwater, but this morning's tests tell us it's different. It is there. So all the things that we were fearing are definitely falling into place, and we don't think it was actioned soon enough.
Put it this way, once the groundwater is contaminated, I mean, it's kind of hard to hit the reverse button, right? Like, it seems like if you have contamination going into the water, you want to minimize the contamination as fast as possible. And the fact that this is still a discussion a month later, have they even solved the problem yet?
No, they have not. One of the biggest problems is storage. Again, we've been asking for action since day two. We are now a month into it, and that has only just begun. Apparently, they've started to build another storage unit, but we were also informed by the company that just the 50,000 liter pool that they built took them 2 weeks. So all of these things that we need done in a hurry aren't getting done in a hurry. And that's definitely one of the issues. We had asked for an independent panel immediately from day two, because based on even just looking at the Mount Poly issue, they had one in place as early as 14 days. And now we are at a month, and that has not been dealt with yet either. We have started talks, but starting talks isn't actioning and getting action on the site.
So, in your view, why is this so slow moving?
I wish I knew. That's my worry. As I keep saying that, I don't understand why they don't understand the severity of this and the human health issues that's tied to it. I have a degree in science, and perhaps it's my science background that I understand the water issue, the groundwater issue, and the chemical issue. And really, it's not even just cyanide. There's a whole sweep of metals that come in that solution with that cyanide. So although we are immediately really highly concerned about the cyanide, there's a whole sweep of other metals that are going to arise as issues as time progresses.
Well, I'm kind of at a loss as well. Now, the company put out a press release saying directly, and I'm sure you read this, we don't know if we have the money to basically fix this problem. And subsequently, just a few days ago, the Yukon government has said we may need to step in. I mean, are you kind of beside yourself? Like, are you going to the federal government? Like, is anybody listening to you?
We have sent letters up to the federal government as well, asking for them to also meet with us all together in the same room, all of the agencies, including Yukon government, so that we're all on the same page of understanding in this catastrophe. We haven't had that. We've had technicians contact our technicians, but that's the extent of it.
Do you think, like, from the Yukon government point of view, that this is a matter of money? I guess you don't know. Like, I already asked you why this is so slow moving, but I mean, do you have any speculation here? Like, is this a money issue? You haven't heard from the premier since in the last month?
Well, since day one, all we know is that Yukon government continues to state that the company is control of the site.
Right, because we saw the headline. It looked like it just said, we might have to step in.
Yeah.
So you must be beside yourself here because, of course, with every passing day, one imagines the contamination of whatever metals. I mean, and this is the problem. There are a whole bunch of unknowns here, and you basically just want to reduce the potential, these unknown risks ultimately. I mean, that's what you want here, I assume. Like you just want this to stop being a catastrophe.
Yes. And we just want it to stop being a catastrophe because the way it is now without actions, it's like a runaway train. And the longer we let that train run, the more disaster it's creating and a lot more cleanup we're going to have to do in back end.
Right. And how do you even clean up, groundwater? I guess you hope it dissipates, but I mean, if you have cadmiums in there or who knows what, easier said than done, I assume.
Correct. And that's why we wanted it actioned as soon as possible to start capturing at least some of it to help alleviate the situation. Our fear is the longer that they do nothing, the bigger the problem it's going to be, not just for us, but for everyone downstream.
Right. Now, you said you reached out to the federal government as well. And what was your response, if any?
They're on vacation.
That is really what seems to be going on here. Like, it is kind of vacation season. Again, where is the premier here? Okay, interesting. So what do, Chief Hope? You're probably wondering the same thing, but now what? It seems like the company, again, has already said there's, limited things we can do financially. So would you pin the responsibility as far as the management of this disaster and making sure it's going forward? Would you say the government is ultimately the person that kind of needs to move a little quicker?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that. Yeah. I even said that to him. At what point are you guys going to take control?
Right. Like, at what point are we going to see action? Because that's exactly what I saw from the press conference and from just everything that I see here. It's like trying to fix a problem from a desk that requires actually heavy machinery, who knows what, stuff to be flown in. You need probably experts. I would imagine there are heap leach pad experts that need to be flown in. It's an all hands on deck situation, isn't it? Because the fact of the matter is you don't know the risks, right? And nobody does, but it doesn't look good, right? So you're not getting the all hands on deck response, are you?
No, we're not. And we sure could use that all hands on deck, that's for sure. I even raised to Minister Stryker that they have not even come to site. They have no idea visually what the severity of the situation is or how it is evolving over time. So I saw pictures from the very first day that the slide occurred, or the failure. I don't like to call it a slide because slides happen naturally in nature, and this is far from nature. 3 days later, our team went out there with drones and took some more pictures. And even in those 3 days, the amount of erosion that happened from just the ponds starting to overflow on the top end were very apparent, and the trenches and the ravines were cut deep into the heap failure.
Okay. Now, you called for a moratorium on mining in Yukon, and of course, that was in the press release, which went out on Facebook. I remember you probably saw the press conference where the response was, well, we don't think actually they want a moratorium. The First Nation wants a moratorium on mining. So, how do you respond to that whole side of things? It seems like you're trying to kind of shake the government a little bit into action.
We are having a challenge on getting response on that. We have asked for a halt in our traditional territory until we can get an understanding of what's going on, the cumulative effects. We're still waiting for land use planning. And we have also been talking to some companies because there's a lot of support that we've been receiving, emails, letters, phone calls. We've also sent out that halt in letters to individual companies. We've actually received some really good responses back in support of Na-Cho Nyäk done in wanting a halt in mining in our traditional territory. Cantax Mining, they have agreed that They'll put their tools down as same as Snowline Gold. They have said that they will halt, and they have offered their services to anything we need that they could immediately help.
Right. To their credit, right? I mean, so this is at least a little bit from the culture of the mining industry. I guess like some grounds for hope here that at least, okay, someone is listening to us.
Absolutely. And that's what we're hoping. Well, we have known for a long time that mining has been pushing government for certainty, especially considering that they owe us land use planning in our final agreement. It's an obligation. They just want to know where they can't go and where they can go, what their rules are. We just want responsible, sustainable mining in our traditional territory that's based on the highest environmental practices to ensure that everything is done in the best ways and not overbearing on the environment. So it cuts off our means for still practicing our traditional values in a partnership. And that's what the final agreements dictate and agree upon within those chapters.
Right. It's not just the spirit of the agreement. It is actually in the actual agreement there. So as you said, it was kind of shocking at first. I guess just to make it crystal clear for me, though. So do you phone the government? Do you email the government? Like when, say, you get your results of, say, water that just came in, how do you contact them? Is it a phone call? Is it a letter? Like, how do you get things going? And what is the response?
So because the Na-Cho Nyäk have created the teams that we did, this week we actually sat down and created a First Nation of Na-Cho Nyäk and Yukon government meeting schedule and working groups so that it's clear who is in what working group. And all of the meetings are scheduled on a daily basis. For instance, Monday, there's 2 meetings. One was between the standing technical. They provide their updates. And then later on was a daily geotech meeting. Tuesdays, for instance, there's a executive and governance meeting. Additional to that, there's an on-site water team meeting. And again, the daily geotech team meets on a daily basis. All of these meetings going on all week. Where there's spaces, that's where I have my internal meetings so that we can caucus and make sure that we're still on the same page with all the information being so dynamic.
And so what does the government tell you, if anything, when you bring up these concerns that things aren't moving fast enough? Like, what do they tell you?
Well, they're waiting to hear back from the company. The company is the ones that are on site right now. And we just keep asking them, when are you going to take control of this mess?
Okay, and let's go to the company then. Like, how has their communication been? I assume you've reached out to them as well. What happens when you talk to the company? What do they say?
So we heard from the company. I heard from John McConnell on the 25th. He contacted me. He came and he offered to do a presentation for my council, and I invited some elders. They had an emergency meeting, so I told John that I included them in the invite. So he came and did the initial analysis, I guess, from their point of view of what happened at site the day before. We have not seen from them since. We've been trying to get them engaged in the CBA process to make sure that we get the information that is required, that they're obligated within that agreement, including we're supposed to be collaborating when there's an emergency like this. We're supposed to be doing decisions together. That way we make sure that the best decisions are made, stuff like that. And we have been totally left out of the loop. They talk to Yukon government and have been from the start. Their technical experts have just started working with our technical experts just the past 2 meetings.
And when was the presentation that was made for you?
It was June 26th, the morning of June 26th.
Okay, so 2 days later. And since then, you basically haven't really got too much from the company until, like, let's say in the last week when you had a couple of meetings.
Correct. We've sent letters out asking them to follow the CBA agreement so that we can have some of that information. We can start developing those discussions to make sure that we're doing things together. But we did not get response on those letters. John McConnell did email myself and asked for a meeting with myself and council, but I would like them to adhere to the agreement that they signed on with and get that rolling. Me and my council have been crazy busy schedule with everything that has happened in the emergency and trying to respond. We're not just sitting around waiting for everybody to have a meeting with us.
Well, exactly. I mean, again, it's like we can't solve this by pushing paper and talking. Like we have to do something. It seems like you want action, right?
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So, final question on this before we go, just zoom out a bit to wider implications of this. So, what is your understanding, like, other than just diverting the water? Is anything happening to fix this? And is there anything that can be done?
I know that our team has created a crisis list of things that they would like to have done to help alleviate and mitigate some of the contamination issues that we might be facing, but they still continue to push for that to happen. We've actually asked to take the lead from the start because we've been on site. We've seen what's out there. We've been doing our best to address it, but still, I feel that we're just a passenger on the bus.
Right. Like, in a sense, if I was the government and I said, you know what, you guys are the ones who are directly involved here. You have experts. Here's $50 million to start. Go. Would that be a good start for you?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And I keep telling them that too. Like, even in our resource discussions, I continue to tell them that this is not a one-off. This is going to be a many-year relationship that we're going to have to develop in keeping this clean. And it's going to be an ongoing thing. It's a catastrophic event. I don't even know if Yukon has experienced such a severity of an extent before.
Right. And you have a vested interest in this. You know, you're hardly anti-mining. I mean, you helped bring this project on. There are several hundred employees, I assume many coming from the First Nation of Na-Cho, Nyäk. So it's not like you want a permanent ban on mining or anything. Like, you actually want mining to work in this place. But as you say, you just want it to be done at what I think people expect from Canadian mining, at the highest standards.
Exactly. And that is why we keep pushing to redo the antiquated mining legislation. We've wanted that it should have been done or started, at least in our traditional territory, the year after we signed our final agreements, so that they align with our final agreements.
So, zooming out then, Chief Hope, governments around the world are trying to secure critical minerals. There's a real push to start mining again. I mean, to me, I'm kind of dumbfounded, frankly, when I see on one hand, we're pushing everything to develop mining, but then we don't even have time because we're on vacation, and we're not even willing to send a check to let people clean it up themselves, you know, the mess that they didn't even create. Like, what do you make of this on a bigger picture? I mean, it's not exactly like bullish for mining in Canada, is it? I mean, but you tell me.
No, it's not. And while the United Nations continues to push for adoption of UNDRIP, I am not quite sure that it's understood what that actually means. It's not to be done in a way to just get critical minerals out of the ground. Those are supposed to be relationships, because we have to reside and live together in these spaces, and our water and our lands need to be clean, because if we don't have clean water, we're all going to be dust.
That's right. I mean, it's not exactly sustainable in the most basic sense of the word, right? If, like, I mean, again, it feels from another century, you know, this idea that we're going to let the water continue to be contaminated and not move, you know, very quickly, maybe 2 centuries ago.
Yes, absolutely. And we're hoping that we can get some movement on mining legislation. But we also are aware that there is looming elections coming up, both federal and for us here territorial. As I stated at Roundup 2024, I was invited to do an opening by Banyan Gold, and I presented what NND's perception on mining is, exactly that. We don't want it stopped. We understand that we need mining. We all drive cars. We use computers on a daily basis, and everything that we do has aspects that come from the ground. We just want it done in the best ways possible in partnerships. For example, I know that everybody struggles with capacity these days. Yukon government does not have the appropriate level of inspectors, for instance, who can go inspect all of these mine entities on a regular basis. However, if we had our agreements in partnership where we're collaborating on my traditional territory, we could double up that and have both of our teams working together in the best interest of Yukoners on a whole, putting human life, interests, and environment first before economy.
It doesn't sound very complicated when you describe it that way, Chief Hope. So I hope this broadcast can help bring that about. Do you have any final thoughts for us here on this situation and basically what you would like to see done?
What I would like to see done is a more movement towards responsible and sustainable mining in partnership with First Nations. Because we do not have that, in reflecting on the catastrophic disaster that happened, we have engaged and we'll be insisting on a mining policy of how you do business in our traditional territory. There must be partnerships. We must be involved from the very beginning to the very end, which includes reclamation and restoration, not just words, but actually getting down and doing it.
Right. I mean, this is a credibility issue, and it's an opportunity to build credibility, right? And so just final question here, as far as this actual disaster, I mean, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you see take place here? What would you like to see happen here?
I would like for them to do everything we asked for on day 2 and hope that it is enough at this point. We cannot continue to chase it down the valley, but we do need to get action to try to do something as much as we can in light of the situation.
Chief Dawna Hope of the Na-Cho Nyäk Dun First Nation, thank you for joining us on this week's Northern Miner podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you once again to Chief Dawna Hope of the Na-Cho Nyäk Dun First Nation for joining us on this week's episode. A fascinating interview, and I appreciate her giving us her time and her perspective on everything that is going on in this huge story in Canadian mining. And thank you, dear listener, for tuning in once again. I hope you're having a wonderful summer. We have a very special show coming up next week for gold bugs, speculators, and everyone in between. It should be a good one. And with that, if you want to help out the podcast, please leave us a review in the Apple Podcast directory, share it with your friends, and until next week, take care.